Hi, I'm Jerry Kelvin, and my channel is all about photographing and filming wildlife. Now, what have I got in store for you today? Let's take a look. Well, good morning. I'm back in my office today to talk about the art of finding birds nesting, being the hunter. And with hunting, of course, in any description, we need to walk through our reserve and check out what's going on. So that's my main way that I find birds nesting, as well as a host of other techniques. So that's what we'll start with, walking through the reserve. Now I'll check it out completely, so do a grid pattern. Might take me a couple of days, just for an hour or something like that. Just do a grid pattern, work my way from one end of the forest to the other. And I'll do that once a week as the season builds up, and then maybe drop it off a little bit to once every fortnight. Depends on what's going on. Now while I'm doing that, I'm looking, so visually looking, as well as listening out. Now there's a thing that we need to do as well is walk back the trails that we've already walked the opposite way, because there's always the case where you're going to miss something. So a bird might have their entrance into a little bit of a shrub on the opposite side. So as we're walking through the thick scrub, we mightn't see it. So coming back the other way is a good technique to make sure you've covered everything. The other way is with listening to birds. I've got that grey thrush in the background there cooing away. Now that is a normal call you would hear in the off season, so when they're not breeding, that's what you would hear. But we're coming into breeding season, we have to listen for the change in the voice, a change in behaviour. So that's a normal call. Now what I'm listening for as I'm walking around a place is when the female changes her note. It becomes a very low pitch, and the closer she gets to where they're either building a nest or whether they've already got one and they've got chicks in the nest, she'll lower her call, so the pitch changes, it gets quite low, and then as she gets closer it goes from a little bit of a song to one note, like that just then. So she's coming in, I know that they've got a nest in here, so that's what I'm listening out for, that little low pitch. Dad's up high in the trees, checking out whether there's anybody around like me, and if there is, he'll tell her, and she'll keep doing that low pitch, asking him. No, asking him whether there's anyone around, and now she does it. So she slowly moves in. So that's a really good technique. Listening to the change in the voice of a bird gives you an indication that they're nesting. There's another bird that I use that technique with too, listening out for the change in voice, and that's the eastern whipbird. Very secretive bird, can be quite hard to find their nest, but if you listen to them, they will tell you roughly where their nest is. Now during the off season, when they're not breeding, they'll roam around the whole reserve searching for food. So I'll hear them everywhere around the place. And there's 3 breeding pairs in here. But they all have their own spot where they like to nest. So they'll nest within 20, 30 metres, maybe even 50 metres of where they nested the year before. Now how I listen out for them is they do a circuit. So within that area that they have each year, could be about a 6-acre lot, they will do a circuit. So a big circle, and you'll hear them do this circuit day after day after day. And as they're going along on this circuit, finding food and mucking around as a pair, they're searching for a nesting site, a potential nesting site. So what we listen out for as they're going along that circuit day after day is a change in their voice. They start to do a bit of a chatter. This is what it sounds like. Now that always gives me an indication that they're very close to a spot that they're happy with. And then, you know, I might have a nest that I'm already filming within that area. So I can just, in my downtime with that particular nest that I'm watching, I can listen out to what's going on with them. I've had great success with that in the past, just lucky to have a nest that's in that area. And I've been able to find their nest by listening out to the circuit that they're doing and where on that circuit they're making that chatter noise. As well as they might go past me, grab a few twigs and fly off. And then you'll hear them chatter, and that's what's right. I've got it. Another technique I use is when trees start to bloom. So shrubs and plants, when they start flowering, gives me an indication that certain birds will be nesting. And I've learnt that over the years, just building up a knowledge of different types of birds, that when they're about to breed, a certain flower comes out. It's a good indication that things are going to start happening. At the minute, we've got the tea tree are starting to flower. That always tells me that it's very close to the white-eared honeyeater will be nesting. And there's lots coming into the reserve, and there's bits of activity, and I've just got to watch out and listen out for their change in behaviour. They get quite aggressive, and they'll chase other birds away all the time. Now we also have to take in consideration the do's and don'ts. Being respectful to the bird that we're trying to film, because we want results and we want them to go about their business without disturbing them too much, so that they go through the whole process of raising their chicks. Every bird, every animal has a circle that they don't like you to come into, so a zone that they'll tolerate you. So some birds will let you come up close and not worry too much. So I've built up this library over the years of slowly testing out, getting into, you know, closer and closer, and you start to see the change in behaviour. They're getting nervous, so you back off. So you've got to find that tipping point and just stay out of it. So you get results. The bird will come in, go about its business, bring up its young without us wrecking things. So keep that in mind, be respectful, as well as not disturbing the nest itself. I have a bit of a stiff shit policy, and that is that if a nest's got branches all the way around it and you can't see in properly, it's just bad luck, isn't it? If we go taking little branches off, or bits of weeds and stuff that are around it so we can see in properly, we're quite likely to disturb the nest itself, and it could tip, and we've just destroyed the nest, haven't we? So we've got to be really careful of how we go about doing stuff like that. So I just have that policy that if I can't see in, well, hopefully I'll find another one that will be better suited. Camo gear. Do I use camouflage while I'm out here checking out birds nesting? And the answer is no. Besides looking dumb and scaring people when I'm walking through the forest, yeah, I decided it's not necessary, because I had a bird that was really nervous about me being there, so I thought maybe if I get camouflage gear it might be a bit more relaxed. Well, it just sat up in that branch, looked at me and said, "Mate, I can see you and you look dumb in that gear, so I don't know why you're wearing it." And that's happened quite a few times, so I don't bother with it anymore. I've had it for 6 years. I only used it for that one breeding season and haven't used it since. Maybe one day there might be somewhere that I can use it again, but in this reserve I don't bother. I just use that sort of colour, nice greys, blacks, and this green. These pants really camouflage well, they match in nicely with the environment here, so yeah. don't bother with camouflage gear. Now another great tool to use is our field book. Just say a new bird comes into the area, you don't know much about it, you don't know what sort of tree or shrubs that it nests in or what material it uses to build its nest. Well, our field book will speed things up for us. Gives us a brief description of potential nesting sites, so what type of tree or shrub that it nests in and the materials that it uses. Also gives us a description of its call, so we can listen out for that and any changes that it might make. Just the book just speeds things up for us and makes it much quicker. And when we're talking about where a bird typically nests, you read your field book and it'll say it nests at this height in a certain type of tree on a certain type of branch or in a certain type of shrub. Keep in mind that's not always going to be the case. It's always the exception to the rule. Some will do totally different to what their breed normally does. Now take the yellow robin for instance. I've got this nest here. That is a typical height for a yellow robin on a typical branch that it would go onto. A dead branch, something that their nest would blend into, and if you walk past it not looking for nests you wouldn't even see it. Blending in beautifully. Now that particular pair have been breeding in this little area for the last 4 years, and that is typical of them. It's always been about that height. Nice and easy for me to film. I had a little platform over there where I could look in a bit better. But I've got to keep in my head all the time, each breeding season, that that's not always going to be the case. There's other yellow robins in here that nest about 20 metres up in some of the wattle trees. So it's typical for them, for those pairs, to nest in a wattle tree, but at a really high height. But then I might get them next year, still be in a wattle tree, but it might be a lot closer to the ground, so they change it every now and then. So keeping that in mind, using that as another technique, because a lot of other birds do it. Little thornbill, it's not always a typical thing for them to build low to the ground. They like those small blade grasses that hang over around the creeks or on a little bank. It makes it a bit harder for other animals to attack them, raid the nest, whatever. But I find them all over the place at all different heights. They're not always close to the ground. Sometimes I've come across them where they're 20 metres in the air. Oh sorry, not in the air, not hanging in the air on a sky hook, but in a tree, about 20 metres high. So they can vary a lot. I found the odd one in the side of a fern trees. So we get quite tall fern trees here, so some, I found them about 2 or 3 metres up on, shoved in the side of the old dead leaves that are hanging down. So there's nothing typical about them. Same with the white-browed scrub wren. They like nesting in those blade grasses as well. That's a typical spot that you would find them. But like this breeding season, I found them in scrubby bushes. There's some of these very scrubby looking little trees, they haven't got much limbs and stuff on them, but they get all this grass growing over them, this climbing grass. And occasionally you'll find them nesting in there. So we've got to be ready to look in new areas, keep that in mind, build up that knowledge, that library in your head of certain birds can do out of the ordinary things. Oh, bit of a blue up there. And it's another rivaling pair grey thrushes. Awesome. Don't mind me, I'm just trying to film. You just keep blueing. Another great technique is seeing a bird picking up a bit of material to make a nest. Now you might not have been ready for that, it's flown off. You just see it shooting off and you've sort of lost track of it, but you saw that it had something in its mouth. Stay where you are. It should come back to the same spot. Not always, but hopefully it does. So just hang around for a little bit. wait for it to come back, grab a bit more of material and fly back off so you can see where it's going to. So walk down halfway, hopefully it'll come back again, grab a bit more of the material and fly past you and go back, and it'll give you that knowledge of where that it's going to, and you'll finally track it down. There's another great technique in that area as well, is what we have here in Australia anyway, is messmate trees there. Bark's very stringy. I've got one here but all the bark's gone off it. Yeah, there's no around. So when the tree dies, it dries out a lot and slowly falls off. But it's one of the most used materials in this reserve for birds building a nest. So if you can stand near one of them and just wait, and you'll get a sign that it's been used by it being a lot brighter. So once you start stripping off some of the nice furry bark, it's all nice and dry, the fibres are all open, it'll go an orangey colour underneath. So that gives you an indication that birds have been taking it. So just hang around it for a little while. Something might happen. And that's photography in general, isn't it? Hanging around somewhere is a better idea than continuously wandering around. We need to stop, sit down and watch what's going on and let nature come to us sometimes. And this is what we're looking for. You can see it's been used a lot. It's quite more brighter, orangey looking. They'll come in, yeah, mouthful of that, fly off. Now I get 9 spotted pardalopes nesting in here, and I know where all of them are. A couple of them I found by that technique. I'll grab that and I'll fly straight back to the nest where they're building a nest. Sometimes a hide could be useful, and I make my own normally if I have to. And here's a little bit of that. I've already made a little ditty on bushcraft. So we'll have a little look at how I go about making a hide. So all I've done is found 2 straight bits of branches that I found lying on the ground that were long enough to go from the fern tree to this other little shrub here. Just enough height so that I can put my camera through, but also my stills camera with the flash on. So you need enough room to do that. But make a little window. All I'm doing with these old fern leaves is just simply hooking them on. So they hook onto there. I'll keep them down so I've still got my nice little height. I'll just keep building these up until it blanks out any of my movement, my feet movement or hand movement. So there's only that little window that'll be showing any movement when they fly onto coming into the nest. But that's a quick, easy setup. It'll just rot away later on. In this particular spot here, you do get a lot of people coming to do a bit of fishing. So they'll probably see this and might wreck it. And it won't take me long to put it back up again either. So that's a great technique, making a screen. Cheap, don't cost you anything. They rot away afterwards as well. Very useful. Now what's the technique that we have to use for those difficult birds, those really hard to find birds, where they're nesting? Well, one of those birds for me is the ground thrush. They hide their nest really well. It looks like an old pile of rubbish most of the time. Sometimes they're a little bit easier to see. But generally, as a rule, you can walk past them time and time again and not notice that that pile of rubbish that's in amongst some branches is actually their nest. So how do we find them? Well, it's the males. The males will show you where they are because they bring in worms to the female. Now, how I find where they're nesting, or try to find where they're nesting, is I'll watch him. He will get worms out of this grass here. It's his favourite patch. He'll pick a couple of worms, eat them himself, then he'll grab the odd one and put it in a little pile. Then he'll pick the pile up, move to another spot, grab a few worms for himself and one for the female. So now he's got a little pile that he's going to fly off and take to her, because that's what ground thrushes do. The males will feed the female while she's in the nest. So that's the technique that we have to use for a difficult bird like that. And one of the things that makes it really difficult to find where they're nesting is because they don't call, they don't make a call that we can hear. They'll make a bit of a high-pitched sort of noise that's beyond our hearing. The only other time that I'll hear the ground thrush call the male, maybe really early in the morning as the sun's rising. He'll do a bit of a chirp, but that's about it. Communication between the two, yeah, they just don't do it that we can hear. So that's the only technique I can use, is by watching the male, grab his wings, fly off over there. He'll weave in and out of the trees he's going through. So sometimes it might be difficult. I might have to stay here for bloody 3 or 4 hours, watch him do that maybe 3 times, because he's not going to do it every 15 minutes or whatever. It's pretty random, usually like once every hour, once every half hour he might do it. Because the female will jump off the nest, have a bit of a stretch and go and get her own worms every now and then. So he doesn't feed her all the time. Well, there's some good techniques for you to use to find birds nesting, hunting them out, walking the trails, getting right into the scrub, do a grid pattern, really check things out and come back the other way. Do it regularly, as well as listening out for the bird's calls, listening to it changing, getting lower pitches, gives you a good idea of where they're nesting, as well as getting material off trees, watching where they're going to with that. And the difficult birds, great technique, that watching them where they're getting their food from, if you're lucky enough that the particular birds like I've got here with those ground thrush, grabbing worms, taking it back to the female. All good techniques to use, as well as remembering that it's not typical that a bird will nest in a certain place, at a certain height, in a certain bush. So be open to look for a different circumstance. So that's enough of me carrying on for today. Remember, if you don't do, you don't get. So get out there and start filming, and I'll catch you around the place. See ya.